The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the fjord mirror still and gleaming like polished steel. Astrid sat at the water's edge, her damaged shield propped against a weathered boulder beside her. The bronze boss had split clean through during yesterday's failed defense of the merchant vessel, and she traced the crack with one finger, feeling the rough edges that mirrored the fractures in her own reputation. 3 ships lost in as many months. The Jarls whispered that she carried a curse now, that the gods had turned their faces from her after some unnamed transgression. She knew better. The raids had grown more dangerous as southern kingdoms strengthened their defenses, and her crews had grown careless with easy victories. But knowing the truth meant nothing when your name became poison on the lips of warriors who once fought gladly at your side. A raven's harsh cry echoed across the water, and Astrid looked up to see the black bird perched on a piece of driftwood nearby. It regarded her with one bright eye, head tilted as if weighing her worth. Ravens were Odin's messengers, but this one seemed different somehow. Its feathers held an unusual blue-black sheen, and it was larger than any she had seen before. "What message do you bring, Dark One?" she murmured, but the bird simply spread its wings and lifted off, flying north toward the mountains that bordered their territory. Astrid gathered her gear and followed the coastline back toward the settlement, dreading the conversations that awaited her. The families of the lost warriors deserved compensation she could no longer provide, and Jarl Magnus would want an accounting of the failed raid. Worse still, her younger brother Bjorn would be waiting with questions she couldn't answer about why their father's legacy seemed to crumble in her hands. The settlement sprawled along the harbor like a great sleeping beast, longhouses and workshops sending thin streams of smoke into the morning air. Children played between the buildings, their laughter a sharp contrast to the weight settling deeper into Astrid's chest with each step. These people depended on successful raids for survival through the harsh winters, and she had failed them when they needed her most. Magnus's hall dominated the settlement's heart, its carved dragon heads glaring down from the roof peaks. She found the Jarl breaking his fast with his advisors, their conversation dying as she entered. The sudden silence felt heavier than her mail shirt. "Astrid Eriksdotter," Magnus said without looking up from his bowl. "I trust you bring better news than your appearance suggests." She kept her voice steady, despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "The southern merchants fought harder than expected. We lost good people, and the cargo went down with their ship. 3 failures. Shieldmaiden." Magnus finally raised his eyes, and she saw no warmth there. "Some say the gods test us through those who have lost their way." One of his advisors, a thin man named Ulf, leaned forward eagerly. "Perhaps it is time for younger hands to lead our raiders, fresh blood untainted by recent misfortunes." Astrid's hand moved instinctively toward her sword hilt, but she forced herself to stillness. Ulf had been angling for influence since his own son had come of age, and her failures gave him the opening he needed. "I have led successful raids for 7 years. 3 setbacks do not erase that record. 3 setbacks that cost us 12 warriors and 4 ships, Ulf pressed. "How many more must die for your pride?" "Enough." Magnus raised a hand, though his expression remained cold. "Astrid, you will stand down from leading raids until the spring thaw. Use the time to consider whether the gods still favor your path." The words hit like a physical blow. Without raids, she was just another mouth to feed through the winter. Worse, stepping aside would confirm every whispered doubt about her leadership. But arguing here would only make her appear desperate. "As you command, Jarl." She kept her head high as she turned to leave, ignoring Ulf's satisfied smile. Outside, the normal bustle of the settlement felt mocking. Fishermen mended nets while smiths hammered metal, all of them productive, while she faced exile from the only life she had known. The raven from the shore perched on a nearby rooftop, watching her with that same peculiar intensity. Bjorn found her at the practice yards, working through sword forms with mechanical precision. Her younger brother had their father's broad shoulders and easy smile, though concern shadowed his features now. "The whole settlement is talking," he said without preamble. Magnus has named Ulf's son to lead the next raid. Astrid's blade whistled through the air, striking the practice post hard enough to send vibrations up her arm. Then Ulf gets what he wanted. This isn't finished, sister. You're the finest warrior in 3 settlements. Skill means nothing if the gods have withdrawn their favor. She lowered her sword, suddenly exhausted. Perhaps it is time to find a different path. Above them, the raven cried once more before disappearing into the northern sky. The chamber beyond the shifting walls stretched impossibly wide, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to writhe and breathe. Astrid's torch flame guttered in the strange air, casting dancing light across surfaces that gleamed like polished metal, yet felt warm as living flesh beneath her tentative touch. She had seen wonders in her travels, the great halls of kings, the carved pillars of distant temples, the aurora dancing across winter skies, but this defied comprehension. Geometric patterns pulsed along the walls with their own inner light, flowing like rivers of molten silver. The very air hummed with power, making her teeth ache and her vision blur at the edges. Her fingers traced one of the glowing channels, and images flooded her mind unbidden. Ships sailing between stars, warriors wielding lightning as weapons, cities that floated above the clouds. She jerked her hand back, gasping. "What manner of sorcery is this?" she whispered, but her words seemed to be absorbed by the chamber itself, leaving no echo. At the far end of the hall, a raised dais held something that made her breath catch. A throne, if throne it could be called, wrought from the same impossible material as the walls. It pulsed with deeper rhythms, like a great heart beating in the darkness. As she approached, the patterns on the floor began to shift beneath her feet, forming a path that led directly to the seat of power. Every instinct screamed at her to flee. This was a place of the old gods, perhaps older still, the sort of power that had sunk mountains and boiled seas in the ancient tales. Yet something drew her forward, not compulsion, but recognition, as if some part of her had always known this moment would come. 3 steps from the throne she stopped. The air here was thick as honey, charged with potential that made her skin prickle. Images swirled around her now without her touching anything, visions of her village consumed by winter that would not end, her people scattered like leaves before an endless storm. She saw familiar faces gaunt with hunger, children's eyes hollow with despair. Then the visions shifted, the same faces, but transformed. Her people stood strong and proud, their weapons gleaming with the same strange light that filled this chamber. Ships that could sail the sky carried them to new lands where eternal summer reigned. The weak became mighty, the hungry became fed, the scattered became united under a banner of impossible power. "The choice is before you, daughter of the ice winds." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, neither male nor female, ancient beyond measure, yet clear as morning frost. Astrid spun, seeking its source, but found only the pulsing walls and the waiting throne. "Who speaks?" she demanded, her hand moving instinctively to her sword hilt. "I am the last echo of those who came before, the ones your people called the Vanir before memory itself grew old and died." The voice carried sad amusement. Though names matter little now, what matters is the choice. "What choice? Speak plainly." The air shimmered, and suddenly she could see through the mountain, through leagues of stone and ice, to where her people struggled against the dying light. Einar's face appeared before her, aged beyond his years, leading the last defenders against raiders who came like wolves in the endless winter night. "Your people face extinction," the voice continued. "The great wheel turns toward an age of ice and darkness that will claim not just your village, but all the scattered tribes of the northern lands. Unless what? Unless one with the blood of both worlds claims the throne and wields the power of the ancients, the power to command storm and lightning, to turn winter into summer, to make the weak into the mighty." Astrid stared at the throne, understanding beginning to dawn like a cold sunrise. "And the price? To sit upon the seat of storms is to become something other than human. The power will remake you, body and soul, until you are as we were, eternal, mighty, and forever apart from those you seek to save. The voice grew softer, tinged with ancient grief. You will preserve your people, but you will no longer be one of them. A guardian they will never truly know, a protector they will fear as much as love. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like mail wrought from despair. To save everyone she cared about, she would have to sacrifice the very thing that made her one of them. To become their salvation, she would have to cease being their sister, their daughter, their kin. "How do I know this power won't corrupt me?" she asked. "How do I know I won't become a tyrant, ruling through fear?" "You don't," the voice admitted. "That is the nature of sacrifice, to risk everything on faith alone. But consider this, child of two bloods, is the certainty of their destruction preferable to the possibility of their salvation?" The throne pulsed brighter, waiting. The runes blazed brighter as Astrid's fingers traced their impossible patterns, each symbol responding to her touch with warmth that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The crystalline pillars hummed with increasing intensity, their light casting dancing shadows across the vast chamber that defied all natural law. "Fascinating." Bjorn breathed beside her, his weathered face reflecting the ethereal glow. "These markings, they're older than anything I've ever studied, yet somehow familiar." Astrid pulled her hand back abruptly as one of the runes flared with sudden brilliance. Where her fingertip had been, the symbol now glowed steady and true, its light spreading to neighboring marks like fire catching dry kindling. The effect rippled outward across the entire wall, awakening dormant sigils that had slumbered in darkness for countless ages. "We shouldn't have touched anything," Ragnar growled, his grip tightening on his axe handle. "This place reeks of cider magic." The air shimmered before them, and suddenly the wall wasn't there anymore. In its place stretched a corridor of impossible design, its walls composed of the same luminescent material as the pillars. The passage beckoned with soft radiance, offering glimpses of chambers beyond that seemed to exist in defiance of the natural order. Astrid felt the familiar weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Every instinct screamed warnings about the otherworldly corridor, yet something deeper called to her, a recognition she couldn't name, as if this place had been waiting specifically for her arrival. "The stories my grandmother told," she murmured, stepping closer to the threshold, "about the halls that existed before Midgard took shape, where the first gods learned to weave fate itself." "Pretty stories won't save us if we're walking into a trap," Ragnar countered, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Even he couldn't deny the pull of whatever lay beyond. Bjorn moved to Astrid's other side, his scholar's curiosity overriding caution. "If these truly are the halls of legend, then what we've discovered could change everything we understand about the world's creation." They entered the corridor together, their footsteps echoing strangely in the crystalline space. The walls responded to their presence, runes awakening in sequence to light their path forward. With each step, Astrid felt something stirring in her mind, whispers just beyond comprehension, knowledge that seemed to seep through her skin like morning mist. The first chamber they encountered defied all rational thought. Geometric shapes of pure light rotated slowly in the air, their movements following patterns that hurt to observe directly. Tables carved from single pieces of midnight black stone held artifacts that seemed to shift between solid matter and dancing energy. Weapons, Ragnar identified with a warrior's eye, approaching one of the tables cautiously. "But unlike any I've ever seen." The object he indicated resembled a sword, if swords could be forged from captured starlight. Its blade existed in a constant state of flux, neither fully material nor entirely ethereal. When Ragnar reached toward it, the weapon responded by brightening, eager for his touch. "Don't," Astrid warned, but her companion's hand was already closing around the hilt. The transformation was immediate. Power coursed through Ragnar like visible lightning, his eyes blazing with newfound strength. The weapon solidified at his touch, becoming a blade that sang with barely contained force. For a moment, he stood transfigured, more than mortal. Then the visions hit. Astrid saw them too, flooding her mind without warning, images of war on a scale beyond comprehension, armies wielding weapons of light and shadow, cities that spanned continents burning beneath alien skies. She watched civilizations rise and fall in heartbeats, saw the very foundations of reality crack beneath the weight of unleashed power. And through it all, a choice echoed like thunder, salvation or damnation, balanced on the edge of a blade. Ragnar staggered, the weapon falling from nerveless fingers. As the visions overwhelmed him, it clattered to the floor and immediately returned to its shifting, incorporeal state. "The price," Bjorn whispered, his face pale with understanding. "There's always a price for power like this." Astrid helped Ragnar steady himself, noting how the big man's hands shook. In his eyes, she saw the same terrible knowledge that now burned in her own mind, the understanding of what this place truly was and what it offered. "We have to keep going," she said, though the words felt like stones in her throat. "Our people are dying while we debate. Whatever the cost, we need to understand our options." They moved deeper into the impossible halls, past chambers filled with wonders and horrors in equal measure. Each room revealed new aspects of the power that dwelt here, the ability to reshape matter itself, to bend the very laws that governed existence. But with each discovery, the weight of choice grew heavier. The ancient hall wasn't just offering them tools for victory, it was presenting them with the fundamental forces of creation and destruction, waiting to see which path they would choose. Behind them, the entrance they'd used sealed itself, ensuring there could be no retreat from whatever lay ahead. The whispers started at dawn, carried on winds that tasted of copper and ozone. Astrid woke with frost in her hair, despite the strange warmth that emanated from the hall's crystalline walls. 3 days had passed since she'd first touched the luminous console. 3 days of visions that came unbidden, glimpses of her village burning, of ships with black sails cutting through familiar fjords like knives through flesh. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to silence the voices that weren't quite voices, more like memories that belonged to someone else. The hall's ancient inhabitants had left more than just their impossible machines behind. They'd left echoes of themselves, fragments of consciousness that clung to the very air like morning mist. "Show us," they seemed to whisper. "Show us your people's need." The request should have terrified her. Instead, Astrid found herself walking toward the great chamber where the primary console waited, its surface rippling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her entire bloodline pressed down upon her shoulders. The machine, if it could be called that, had been teaching her, not through words or images, but through direct understanding that bloomed in her mind like flowers pushing through snow. She knew now that the hall was more than a repository of ancient knowledge. It was a weapon, designed by a civilization that had faced extinction and chosen to preserve their power for whoever might come after. The price, however, remained maddeningly unclear. Astrid's fingers hovered over the console's surface. Yesterday's vision had shown her the raiders' true numbers, not hundreds but thousands, sailing from a dozen different clans united under banners she didn't recognize. They moved with purpose that spoke of more than simple conquest. They were running from something, pushing south with the desperation of animals fleeing a forest fire. But running from... The crystal beneath her palm grew warm, and suddenly she was elsewhere, standing on a wind-swept plateau where the aurora danced even in daylight. Before her rose structures that dwarfed even the ancient hall, their surfaces crawling with the same impossible geometry that made her eyes water. And emerging from those structures came things that had once been human, their faces bearing expressions of terrible hunger. The vision shattered like thin ice, leaving her gasping. Now she understood. The raiders weren't conquering, they were fleeing. Something had awakened in the far north, something that turned men into vessels for an alien appetite. The same technology that powered this hall existed elsewhere, in forms that had been corrupted, twisted into purposes their creators never intended. The choice remains yours, daughter of iron and salt. Astrid spun, her hand instinctively reaching for a sword that wasn't there. Standing in the chamber's entrance was a figure that seemed carved from shadow and starlight, tall, impossibly thin, with eyes that held the depth of winter seas. It wore no face she could properly focus on, features shifting like smoke whenever she tried to look directly. "You're one of them," she said, though her voice emerged as barely a whisper. "The builders. I am what remains of purpose, unfulfilled." The being's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. We sought to preserve what we were. Instead, we preserved only what we feared to become. The temperature in the chamber plummeted. Frost began forming on the walls, and Astrid's breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. "The machines in the north," she said. "You built those too." "We built many things. Not all of them were wise." The figure moved closer, and with each step the frost spread further. "Power without wisdom becomes corruption. Wisdom without sacrifice becomes worthless philosophy. Your people face both our greatest achievement and our greatest failure." Astrid felt the weight of understanding settle around her like a burial shroud. "The sacrifice you want, it's not just death, is it? Death is simple. What we require is far more costly." The being extended one translucent hand toward the console. "To wield our weapons, you must become them. To command our power, you must abandon what makes you human. The choice is not whether to die, but whether to live as something else entirely." The hall fell silent except for the distant humming of hidden machinery. Astrid stared at the console, seeing now the trap that lay beneath its promise of salvation. She could save her people, could turn back the tide of corruption spreading from the north, but only by becoming part of the very force she sought to stop. "How long do I have to decide?" The confluence approaches. When next the lights dance in the southern sky, the barriers between what was and what could be will thin to nothing. "Choose quickly, Shieldmaiden. Choose wisely." The figure began to fade, becoming translucent as morning fog. "And choose knowing that mercy is often cruelty by another name." The frost-covered ground crunched beneath Astrid's boots as she led Bjorn and Einar through the twisted birch forest toward the hidden entrance. Dawn light filtered through skeletal branches, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and dance. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from exertion, but from the weight of what she was about to reveal. "You've been acting strange since the raid on Thorvald's settlement," Bjorn said, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Stranger than usual, even for a disgraced Shieldmaiden." Astrid shot him a withering look. "Perhaps because our people are starving while our Jarl sits in his mead hall, counting his diminishing stores." "Careful," Einar warned, glancing around as if the trees themselves might carry word back to Jarl Magnus. "Such talk borders on treason. What I'm about to show you makes my words seem like children's whispers." They reached the moss-covered outcropping where Astrid had first discovered the entrance 3 days ago. To untrained eyes, it appeared to be nothing more than a natural formation of stone and earth. But Astrid knew better now. She pressed her palm against a specific section of rock, feeling the strange warmth that shouldn't exist in this frozen landscape. The ground shuddered. Ancient mechanisms, silent for centuries, groaned to life. A section of what appeared to be solid earth slid away, revealing steps that descended into blue-tinged darkness. Bjorn stumbled backward, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword hilt. "By Thor's hammer, what sorcery is this?" "Not sorcery," Astrid said, though her voice carried uncertainty. "Something else entirely, something older." She lit a torch and began the descent. Behind her, she heard Einar's sharp intake of breath and Bjorn's muttered prayers to the gods. The walls on either side were smooth as polished marble, inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and flow in the torchlight. Some resembled the runes her father had taught her, but others were completely alien, hurting her eyes to look upon directly. The passage opened into the great hall, and Astrid heard her companion's footsteps falter. The ethereal blue light emanated from crystalline formations embedded in the walls, pulsing with a rhythm that matched a heartbeat. The air hummed with barely contained energy. "This cannot be real," Einar whispered, his scholarly mind struggling to process what his eyes reported. Such craftsmanship, such knowledge. It's impossible. Astrid approached the central dais, where the largest crystal formation rose from the floor like a frozen tree. 3 days ago, I would have agreed with you. How did you find this place? Bjorn asked, his warrior's instincts keeping him near the entrance, ready to flee or fight. I was tracking wounded deer from our hunt. The blood trail led here. She didn't mention the dreams that had plagued her sleep, or the whispers she'd begun hearing whenever she touched the crystals. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with trusted friends. Einar moved closer to examine the wall inscriptions, his fingers hovering just above the carved symbols. These runes, some are familiar, but others, it's as if they're from a language that predates our people entirely. Touch nothing, Astrid warned sharply. Not yet. But even as she spoke, she felt the pull of the central crystal. During her previous visits, she'd discovered that physical contact with the formations triggered visions, glimpses of knowledge that made her head pound and her nose bleed. She'd seen weapons that could level mountains, devices that could heal any wound, machines that could bring the dead back to life. She'd also seen the price such power demanded. Astrid. Bjorn's voice carried a note of fear she'd never heard from him before. We should leave. This place, it feels wrong, like a tomb. Not a tomb, she replied, moving toward the crystal despite her own reservations. A repository, a storehouse of knowledge left behind by those who came before. Before who? Einar asked, still studying the runes. Before the giants? Before the gods themselves? Astrid placed her hand on the crystal's surface. Immediately the blue light intensified and the humming grew louder. Images flooded her mind. Vast cities powered by crystal technology, flying vessels that moved without sail or oar, and people who looked almost human but whose eyes held the depth of centuries. She saw the great dying, a plague that consumed their civilization from within. She witnessed their desperate attempts to preserve their knowledge, hiding it in places like this hall, hoping that future generations might prove worthy of such power. And she saw the warning, written in blood and desperation. This technology could save or damn any civilization that discovered it. The choice would reveal the true nature of those who dared to wield it. Astrid jerked her hand away, gasping. Blood trickled from her nose, and her vision swam. What did you see? Einar demanded, steadying her as she swayed. Our salvation, she whispered, and perhaps our doom. The crystal's light began to fade, but the knowledge remained, burning in her mind like a brand. The crystalline corridors stretched endlessly before Astrid, each step echoing with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. The ancient hall had revealed more of itself after her blood offering, walls sliding away to expose chambers filled with impossible contraptions that hummed with otherworldly energy. She pressed forward, driven by a mixture of desperation and dread. Her wounded palm throbbed where she'd cut it against the activation stone. The price had been small, a few drops of blood, but something in the hall's response told her this was merely the beginning of what would be asked of her. Behind her, Ragnar's breathing grew increasingly labored. The fever that had taken hold during their journey into the hall's depths was worsening, his face flushed and slick with sweat despite the cool air. She'd fashioned a crude bandage from her cloak for the infected wound on his shoulder, but it wasn't enough. Nothing she could do would be enough without the power that lay somewhere in these twisting passages. The runes, Ragnar whispered, leaning heavily against a wall that pulsed with soft blue light. They're changing. Astrid looked where he pointed. The strange markings that covered every surface were indeed shifting, ancient symbols morphing into new configurations before her eyes. As they changed, her understanding of their meaning grew clearer, as if the hall itself was teaching her its language. Deeper, the symbols seemed to say, "The heart awaits." A distant sound made her freeze. The clash of metal on metal carried on currents of air that shouldn't exist in this buried place. Somewhere behind them, her father's warriors had found the entrance. She'd known they would follow eventually, but she'd hoped for more time. Jarl Gunnar? Ragnar asked, recognizing the same sounds. Yes, we need to move faster. One image made her stop completely. Her own village, but not as it existed now. The settlement sprawled across twice as much land, with buildings of gleaming metal rising alongside traditional longhouses. Ships unlike any she'd ever seen rested in the harbour, their hulls smooth and white as whalebone, but clearly crafted from some other material entirely. What sorcery is this? Ragnar breathed. Before Astrid could answer, another image replaced the first. The same harbour, but now it burned. Massive creatures she couldn't name swept through the settlement, and the sky itself seemed to bleed fire. Bodies littered the ground, and the strange ships lay broken and half submerged. The display flickered again, showing a third vision. Her village as it stood now, small and struggling, but with people she recognized going about their daily lives. Her mother hanging nets to dry, her younger brother practicing sword forms, all of them unaware of the terrible choice that lay before her in these depths. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, echoing through the corridors with increasing urgency. Her father's voice carried over the others, commanding his warriors to fan out and search every passage. He'd brought more men than she'd expected. This was no longer a rescue mission, but a hunt. "Astrid," Ragnar said softly, "whatever lies ahead, you know I'll stand with you." She met his eyes, seeing past the fever and pain to the steadfast loyalty that had never wavered, even when her own people had turned against her. "I know, but I'm beginning to fear that where I'm going, no one can follow." The corridor opened into a vast chamber that took her breath away. The ceiling soared beyond sight, and in the center stood a pillar of pure light that stretched from floor to the invisible heights above. Around its base, a series of pedestals held objects that seemed to shift between solid matter and pure energy. She could feel their power from across the room, a thrumming that made her teeth ache and her scars burn. But it was the figure standing beside the light pillar that made her hand instinctively reach for her sword. Tall and draped in robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself, the being turned as they approached. Its face was humanoid but wrong, too perfect, too symmetrical, with eyes that held depths of knowledge that no mortal mind should possess. "Welcome, daughter of the northern winds," it said, its voice carrying harmonics that no human throat could produce. "I have waited so long for one worthy of the choice." "What choice?" Astrid demanded, though part of her already knew. The being gestured to the artifacts around the pillar. "The power to save your people, to elevate them beyond their current struggles, to grant them dominion over land and sea." Its expression shifted, becoming almost sad. But power demands sacrifice, always sacrifice. The sounds of her father's approach echoed from the corridor behind them. The crystalline sphere pulsed with an inner light that seemed to respond to Astrid's heartbeat. She stood frozen before the central console, her calloused fingers hovering just above its surface. The voices of the hall's ancient technology whispered through her mind, offering knowledge that could reshape the fate of nations. "The Jotun fleet numbers 300 longships," the ethereal voice continued, its words forming in her thoughts rather than her ears. "They carry weapons forged in the deep fires, metal that drinks the light of stars. Your people's iron will shatter against such forces." Astrid's jaw clenched. She had seen the devastation at Bjornholm, the way entire shield walls had crumpled before the giants' advance. "Then tell me how to stop them. Touch the heart of Asgard. Accept the binding." The sphere beckoned, its glow intensifying. Through its translucent surface, Astrid glimpsed swirling galaxies, impossible geometries that hurt to perceive directly. This was no mere crystal, it was a fragment of something far older than the gods themselves. Behind her, she heard Einar's laboured breathing. The young skald had been unconscious for hours since touching one of the smaller devices. His face remained pale, etched with lines of pain that spoke of visions too vast for a mortal mind to contain. What price would the heart exact from her? "My strength?" Astrid laughed bitterly. "I have no strength left. My shield sisters cast me out, My clan name is Ash. What could you possibly take from me? Your solitude." The word struck her like a physical blow. In the depths of her exile, in the long nights of self-imposed isolation, she had learned to find power in standing alone. It was the one thing that remained purely hers, the ability to make choices without considering others, to bear consequences that touched no one else. "The heart connects all who have touched it," the voice explained. "Past, present, and future. You would feel their joys, their sufferings, their deaths. Every soul who has wielded this power becomes part of you, and you become part of them. There is no privacy, no respite, no escape from the weight of their experiences." Astrid thought of Thora, probably preparing for a doomed last stand at the clan hold, of her younger brother Olaf, barely 16 and eager to prove himself in battle, of the countless children who would never see another winter if the Jotun advance continued unchecked. How many have touched it before me? 73 souls across the ages. Kings and queens, warriors and scholars, the desperate and the ambitious. All sought power, all paid the price. 73 minds, carrying the accumulated weight of millennia. She would know their fears, their regrets, their final moments. But she would also know their wisdom, their skills, their mastery over forces that could turn the tide of war. A new sound reached her ears, the distant echo of battle horns. The Jotun had found this place. "Choose quickly," the voice urged. "They bring star metal weapons that can breach even these ancient walls." Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her father's sword at her side. Bloodheart had tasted the life of giants before, but it was only iron and steel. Against the supernatural might of the Jotun, it might as well be a child's wooden toy. The hall shuddered as something massive struck its exterior. Dust cascaded from the impossibly high ceiling, and several of the floating lights flickered. Whatever the giants were using to assault the structure, it was working. She opened her eyes and stared at the heart of Asgard. Will it be enough? Will this power truly save my people? Power is neither salvation nor damnation. It merely is. What matters is the will that guides it. Another impact, closer this time. Through the walls, she could hear the deep voices of the Jotun calling to each other in their ancient tongue. They spoke of fire and ending, of clearing the old magics from the earth. Astrid thought of her sister Ingrid's laugh, bright and musical as silver bells, of her mother's hands, gentle despite their strength, braiding her hair before her first battle, of the way sunlight looked streaming through the smoke hole of the clan hall on winter mornings. All of it would die if she failed here. She reached out and grasped the heart of Asgard. The universe exploded into her consciousness. 73 voices cried out in unison, welcoming her into their eternal fellowship. She felt the dying breath of kings, the first steps of children, the weight of decisions that had shaped the course of history. Love and loss, triumph and failure, hope and despair, all of it flooded through her at once. But beneath the cacophony of human experience, she felt something else, power beyond imagining, waiting to be claimed. The hall's defenses awakened at her touch, and Astrid smiled through her tears as ancient weapons came online. The crystalline walls of the hall pulsed with an inner light that seemed to respond to Astrid's heartbeat. 3 days had passed since she'd first entered this impossible place, and still the ancient technology defied everything she thought she knew about the world. The floating orbs of light followed her movements, casting dancing shadows across surfaces that felt both solid as stone and fluid as water. She pressed her palm against the central pillar, feeling the familiar warmth spread through her fingers. The visions came easier now, flooding her mind with images of the hall's creators. They called themselves the Etherians, beings who had mastered forces beyond fire and iron. In their time, the frozen wastes above had been green meadows, and their civilization had spanned continents. "Show me again," she whispered to the pillar. "Show me how to save my people." The hall responded, walls shifting like liquid mercury to reveal new chambers. In one, she saw weapons that could level mountains. In another, devices that could heal any wound or sickness. But always, the same message echoed through the visions. Power demanded payment, and the greater the power, the steeper the cost. Astrid pulled her hand away, breath misting in the suddenly cold air. The hall's temperature seemed to fluctuate with her emotions, growing warm when she felt wonder and chilling when doubt crept in. She'd learned to read these signs, understanding that the ancient structure was somehow alive, aware of her presence and her intentions. Astrid of the Iron Shore. The voice that echoed through the chamber was familiar, sending a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with temperature. Jarl Thorvald emerged from shadows that shouldn't have existed, his scarred face grim with purpose. Behind him came Eric Bloodaxe and 3 other warriors she recognized from her father's hall. "How did you find this place?" She kept her voice steady, though her hand instinctively moved to her sword hilt. Thorvald's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "Did you think your exile would protect us from the consequences of your recklessness? The ice above has been cracking for days. The tremors reach our settlement, and strange lights dance in the sky. Whatever sorcery you've awakened here threatens us all." "You don't understand." Astrid stepped between the warriors and the central pillar. "This isn't sorcery. It's something far older, far more powerful. The knowledge here could save our people from the coming winter, from the plague that even now spreads through our lands." Eric spat on the crystalline floor. "Lies. You've always been too eager to embrace the unnatural. First, you refused to take a husband and tend hearth like a proper woman. Then you brought shame on your father's name in battle. Now you cavort with demons in this cursed place." "These aren't demons." Astrid's voice rose, echoing strangely off the walls. "The Etherians were trying to save their world when the Great Cold came. They built this hall as a repository of knowledge, a way to preserve their civilization. And where are they now?" Thorvald's hand rested on his axe handle. If their power was so great, why did they perish? The question hit harder than any physical blow because Astrid had wondered the same thing. The visions had shown her glimpses of the Etherians' final days, desperate attempts to hold back an endless winter, cities abandoned as the ice advanced, and finally, terrible choices made in the name of survival. "They used the hall's power," she admitted. "But the cost." She trailed off, remembering fragments of images too disturbing to voice. The Etherians had indeed tried to save their world, channeling energies that could reshape reality itself. But such power required fuel, and in their desperation, they had fed the machines with something precious beyond measure. Thorvald stepped closer, his warriors fanning out to surround her. "The cost was their lives, wasn't it? And now you would repeat their folly. I would learn from their mistakes." But even as she spoke, Astrid felt doubt gnawing at her resolve. The hall's whispers grew louder when she was alone, promising easy solutions to impossible problems. It would be simple to activate the great machines, to channel their power against the threats facing her people. The weapons could destroy any enemy, the healing devices could end all suffering, and the climate controls could bring back the green seasons of legend. All it would require was one perfect sacrifice, a life freely given, offered with love and honor intact. The hall had shown her this truth in 1,000 different ways, and each time she saw the same face reflected in the crystalline surfaces, her own. The warriors advanced another step, their intentions clear. They had come to destroy this place and her along with it, believing that would end the threat. They couldn't see what she had learned to perceive, that the hall's true danger lay not in its destruction, but in the terrible temptation of its gifts. The crystalline walls of the ancient hall pulsed with an otherworldly light as Astrid pressed her palm against the central console. The alien symbols beneath her fingers grew warm, then scalding, but she didn't pull away. The visions that flooded her mind were worth any pain, glimpses of knowledge that could reshape everything she understood about the world. "The builders were not gods," she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the vast chamber. "They were refugees." Behind her, Bjorn shifted nervously. his hand never straying far from his sword hilt, despite the futility of steel against this ancient power. "What are you seeing, Astrid?" The images cascaded through her consciousness like a torrent of liquid fire, a dying world, its skies choked with ash and poison, ships that sailed between stars, carrying the last remnants of a civilization beyond imagination, and Earth, young, verdant Earth, chosen as sanctuary. "They came here fleeing something terrible," she said, her eyes still closed, still drinking in the visions. A darkness that devoured worlds, consumed entire star systems. They built these halls as warnings and weapons. "The winters grow longer each year," Astrid continued, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality as the ancient knowledge merged with her own thoughts. "The crops fail more often. The ice creeps further south with each passing season. This isn't mere weather, it's the shadow of that same darkness the builders fled. It has found us." Bjorn stepped closer, his weathered face grave. "And this place can stop it." Astrid finally opened her eyes, but they now glowed with the same ethereal light as the hall's walls. "It can, but the price—" She turned to face him, and he stepped back involuntarily at what he saw in her transformed gaze. The builders left instructions. The weapon they created requires a consciousness to guide it, a willing sacrifice to serve as its eternal guardian. The sphere pulsed brighter, and suddenly the hall was filled with ghostly figures, translucent beings in flowing robes who moved with purpose among control panels that materialized from thin air. The last builders, preserved in some form beyond death, still tending to their ancient vigil. One of them approached Astrid, its face a mixture of sorrow and desperate hope. When it spoke, the words formed directly in her mind, bypassing her ears entirely. "The choice falls to you, daughter of the northern winds. We have waited so long for one worthy to carry this burden." "You speak of burden," Astrid replied aloud, addressing the ghost. "But what of my people? What of the villages that even now freeze in the endless winter? Can this weapon truly save them?" "It can turn back the darkness for another 1,000 years," the builder replied. "But only if wielded by one willing to become part of the mechanism itself. Your consciousness would merge with ours, your will bound to the weapon's purpose. You would save your world, but you would no longer be part of it." Bjorn moved to her side, his voice urgent. "There must be another way. These halls contain knowledge beyond imagining. Surely there's some other solution." The ghostly builder turned its attention to him, and Bjorn shivered as that alien intelligence studied him. "The young warrior speaks from love, but there is no other path. We tried for centuries to find alternatives. The darkness responds only to sacrifice, to the willing surrender of individual existence for the sake of all life." Astrid felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a burial shroud. She thought of her father's disappointment, her exile from the clan, the shame that had driven her to seek death in these frozen wastes. Perhaps this was why the gods had guided her steps here, not for redemption, but for transformation into something far greater and more terrible. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "The shadow grows stronger with each passing day. Already it reaches through the barriers we erected, bringing cold and despair to your lands. Soon it will break through entirely, and no weapon will suffice to stop it." The sphere pulsed again, and Astrid could feel its call in her very bones. Power beyond imagination, the ability to shield an entire world from ancient evil, but at the cost of everything that made her human. She closed her eyes and reached out with senses she didn't know she possessed, feeling for the threads of fate that bound her to this moment. Somewhere far above, her people huddled around failing fires, watching their children grow thin on diminishing stores of grain. Somewhere beyond the stars, an ageless hunger stirred, preparing to feast once more. The choice was hers alone. The crystalline pathways beneath Astrid's feet pulsed with an urgent rhythm as she descended deeper into the hall's lower sanctum. Each step sent tremors through the ancient structure, and she could hear the groaning of metal and stone above as the frost giant's assault intensified. Time was running out. The whispered voices of the hall's consciousness grew louder now, no longer speaking in the old tongue but in something far more primitive, the language of desperate hunger. The walls themselves seemed to breathe around her, exhales of cold vapor that carried the scent of iron and forgotten battles. "Show me," she demanded, pressing her palm against a section of wall that gleamed like black ice. "Show me what you need." The surface rippled beneath her touch, and suddenly she was no longer standing in the corridor but witnessing something far older than her people's memory. She saw the hall as it once was, not buried beneath ice and earth, but soaring above a vast city of impossible spires. Ships sailed not on water but through the air itself, their hulls gleaming with the same crystalline technology that surrounded her now. The vision shifted, showing her the chamber at the hall's heart where a figure knelt before an altar of pure energy. The person's face was obscured, but Astrid could feel their anguish as they placed their hands upon the altar's surface. Light flowed from them, not just illumination but something deeper, their essence, their very soul, feeding the hungry machinery that kept the darkness at bay. But it hadn't been enough. The sacrifice had only delayed the inevitable, preserving this fragment of their civilization in frozen sleep until someone else could take up the burden. The vision faded, leaving Astrid gasping in the corridor once more. Above her, she heard Bjorn's voice raised in a battle cry, followed by the distinctive crack of Skadi's ice magic. Her friends were fighting for their lives, while she stood here contemplating ancient horrors. "There has to be another way," she whispered to the walls. "Your builders were wrong. Sacrifice doesn't have to mean death." The hall's response was immediate and overwhelming, a flood of images showing her the true scope of what lay dormant within these crystalline veins. Weapons that could turn thought into reality, shields that bent space itself, knowledge that could reshape the very foundations of the world, all of it waiting for the right key, the right sacrifice to unlock its potential. But as the images washed over her, Astrid began to understand something the hall's builders had missed. They had seen only one kind of sacrifice, the giving up of life, the surrender of self to feed their creation's endless hunger. They had never considered that true sacrifice might be choosing to bear a burden rather than laying it down. She thought of her father, dying with dishonor's weight upon his shoulders, of her mother, choosing exile over explanation, of herself, cast out from everything she'd ever known because she dared to speak truth to power. Each of them had sacrificed something precious, but none of them had chosen to sacrifice their principles. The sound of splintering wood echoed from above. The main doors were giving way. Astrid ran toward the central chamber, her understanding crystallizing with each step. The hall didn't need her death. It needed her choice. It needed someone willing to accept the weight of its power and the responsibility that came with it, someone who understood that true honor lay not in dying gloriously, but in living with the consequences of difficult decisions. The chamber's doors stood open before her, revealing the altar the vision had shown her. It was smaller than she'd expected, no larger than a warrior's shield, but the energy radiating from its surface made her teeth ache. The air around it shimmered like heat waves, though the temperature remained glacial. Behind her, she heard footsteps, heavy boots on crystal pathways. Bjorn's voice called her name, closer now but still distant. He had broken through, was coming for her, but she knew he wouldn't arrive in time to change what had to happen. Astrid approached the altar slowly, feeling the weight of generations pressing down upon her shoulders. The hall's consciousness reached out to her, no longer hungry but almost grateful. It had waited so long for someone who understood. She placed her hands upon the altar's surface and felt the power surge through her like lightning. But instead of draining her life away, it connected her to something vast and ancient. She could feel the hall's full potential awakening, responding not to her death, but to her willingness to accept its burden. The crystalline walls blazed with newfound light, and somewhere far above she heard the frost giant's roar of surprise and rage. The real battle was just beginning. The crystalline walls of the ancient hall pulsed with an eerie blue light as Astrid's fingers hovered over the final rune sequence. Each symbol seemed to burn itself into her vision, their meaning both alien and strangely familiar. The weight of her choice pressed down like a mountain. Activate the device that could save her people from the encroaching ice, or destroy it to prevent an unspeakable catastrophe. Behind her, she heard the shuffle of feet on stone. Bjorn had awakened, his breathing labored but steady. The wound she'd given him in their desperate fight was healing unnaturally fast, another gift of this place's strange power. Or perhaps another curse. "You feel it too," he said, his voice rough with pain and something that might have been relief. The weight of knowing. Astrid didn't turn around. The glowing interface before her showed images that defied understanding. Vast ships sailing between stars, worlds reduced to ash and ice, civilizations rising and falling like waves upon an endless shore. The previous inhabitants of this place had faced the same choice she now confronted. "They chose power," she whispered, watching the ghostly recordings play out their ancient tragedy. They thought they could control it, and their world died for it. Bjorn's footsteps approached slowly, carefully. He knew better than to startle her now, with her hand so close to either salvation or damnation. "But our people are dying regardless, Astrid. The ice spreads further each day, the herds are gone, the children grow weaker." She closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the alien machinery through the floor, through her bones. In her mind's eye she saw her village, Ingrid's hollow cheeks, little Olaf's rattling cough, the empty storehouses that should have been full for winter, the council that had cast her out for her father's crimes, now desperate enough to have sent Bjorn after her when the ancient maps had surfaced. "The price," she said, opening her eyes to stare at the swirling patterns of light. "Tell me you understand the price." Bjorn was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of shared knowledge. One life, freely given to bind the power, to ensure it serves rather than consumes. He paused. "It should be me." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "You have a family, a son who needs his father, and you have a people who need their guardian, whether they know it or not." Astrid's laugh was bitter. "Guardian? They named me Oathbreaker, cursed daughter of a traitor. They would have been content to let me die in exile. But you wouldn't be content to let them die in turn." Bjorn moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could see the ancient scripts reflecting in his eyes. "That's who you are, Astrid Eriksdotter. Not your father's crimes, not their judgment. This, standing here, ready to sacrifice everything for people who cast you out, this is who you choose to be." The machine's hum grew louder, more insistent. Through the translucent walls, she could see movement in the corridor beyond. The Guardians were returning, drawn by the device's activation sequence. Whatever choice she made, it had to be now. "If I do this," she said, her voice barely audible above the growing resonance, "promise me something, anything. Tell them the truth, all of it, about this place, about what the power costs, about why it must never be sought again. Let my choice means something more than just their survival." Bjorn nodded solemnly. "I swear it, by Thor's hammer and Odin's eye." Astrid placed her palm flat against the central rune. Immediately, tendrils of blue energy began to spiral up her arm, not painful but strangely warm. The machine responded to her touch, ancient mechanisms whirring to life throughout the massive chamber. She could feel its hunger, its eagerness to bond with a living consciousness and reshape the world according to her will. She had learned the true lesson of this place. Power without restraint was destruction. Control without wisdom was folly. The civilization that had built this wonder had possessed incredible knowledge, but they had lacked the one thing that mattered most, the humility to accept limits. "The ice will retreat," she said, watching the energy patterns flow through her body. "The herds will return. The land will be green again, but only as it should be. Nothing more, nothing excessive." The machine pulsed, acknowledging her parameters. She felt her life force beginning to merge with its ancient circuits, becoming the moral compass it had always lacked. Her consciousness would endure, woven into every decision it made, ensuring that its gifts came with wisdom rather than corruption. As the transformation began in earnest, Astrid Eriksdottir smiled. She had found her honor at last, not in the glory of battle or the judgment of others, but in the simple choice to give everything for those who needed protection, even from their own desires. The last thing she heard before the change completed was Bjorn's voice, strong and clear. "Your sacrifice will be remembered." The crystalline walls of the ancient hall pulsed with an ominous rhythm as Astrid pressed her palm against the central console. The alien symbols beneath her fingers burned ice-cold, their meaning flooding her mind like winter wind through cracked stone. She understood now what the builders of this place had truly created, not just a weapon, but a choice that would echo through eternity. Behind her, Bjorn's labored breathing filled the chamber. The poison from the shadow beast's claws was spreading faster than she'd hoped. Dark veins crawled up his neck, and his once steady sword arm trembled against his side. Her brother, her anchor to the world above, was dying. "The price," she whispered, reading the flowing script that materialized in the air before her. "One soul freely given to power the great cleansing. The corruption will be burned away, but the fire requires fuel." Bjorn struggled to his feet, one hand pressed against the wall for support. "What does it say, sister?" Astrid's jaw clenched. She had always been honest with him, even when truth cut deeper than any blade, but now, with the fate of their people hanging in the balance and death creeping through his veins, she found herself hesitating. "It says we can save everyone," she said finally. Not a lie, but not the whole truth either. The hall's central pillar began to glow brighter, responding to her touch. Through the transparent walls, she could see the corruption spreading across the landscape like spilled ink. The shadow beasts moved in vast hordes now, consuming everything in their path. In the distance, smoke rose from what had once been their village. "Do it," Bjorn gasped, sliding down the wall. "Whatever it takes, Astrid. Our people." "Our people cast me out," she reminded him, though the bitterness in her voice had faded to something closer to resignation. "They called me Oathbreaker, coward. Why should I bleed for those who would not even speak my name?" "Because you're not like them." Bjorn's eyes, fever-bright but still sharp with the intelligence that had made him the finest war leader of their generation, fixed on hers. "You never were. That's why they feared you, why they had to find reasons to push you away. You see beyond the horizon, sister. You always have." The console's glow intensified, and Astrid felt the ancient power stirring beneath her feet. The hall itself was alive, she realized, a sleeping giant that had waited centuries for someone worthy to wake it. But worthiness, apparently, was measured in sacrifice. She closed her eyes and reached deeper into the machine's alien consciousness. The knowledge flowed through her in torrents, star charts of worlds long dead, histories of civilizations that had faced this same corruption, and always, always the same terrible equation. One life to save thousands, one soul to fuel the cleansing fire. The builders of this place had faced their own version of the shadow plague. They had made the choice and won and died, leaving only their warning and their weapon behind for whoever came next. "Astrid," Bjorn's voice was growing weaker. "Whatever you're planning, do it quickly. I don't think I have much time left." She opened her eyes and turned to face him, her little brother, who had followed her into exile without question, who had stood with her against creatures that had no name in any human tongue. Who would die here in this strange place, surrounded by wonders he could barely comprehend, because she had been too proud to find another way? "I need to tell you something," she said, kneeling beside him, "about the price." But before she could speak, the hall's defensive systems suddenly blazed to life. Crimson light flooded the chamber as something massive struck the outer walls. Through the crystal she could see them, shadow beasts larger than any they had yet encountered, their forms writhing with stolen life force from the villages they had consumed. The corruption had found them. "They're breaking through," Bjorn observed with the calm of a warrior who had accepted his fate. "How long do we have?" Astrid felt the ancient walls shudder under another impact. Hairline cracks appeared in the crystal, spreading like spider webs. The hall's defenses were formidable, but they had been designed to protect against conventional armies, not entities that existed partially outside normal reality. Minutes, maybe less. She stood, her hand still connected to the console. The weapon was ready. All she had to do was make the final choice. Another impact shook the hall, and this time the cracks reached deeper. Beyond the walls, she could see her own reflection multiplied 1,000 times in the fractured crystal, a disgraced Shieldmaiden with blood on her hands and impossible power at her fingertips. One life to save thousands. The question was, whose? The crystalline chamber pulsed with ancient light as Astrid pressed her palm against the central control nexus. The alien symbols danced beneath her touch, responding to her presence with an eagerness that made her stomach churn. She could feel the vast machinery awakening around her, stretching through corridors and chambers that extended far deeper into the earth than she had ever imagined. "The price has been shown to you," the voice of the hall whispered through the walls themselves. "The knowledge you seek, the power to save your people, all can be yours. But first, you must choose." Behind her, Ragnar's labored breathing echoed in the chamber. The poison from the Guardian's blade was spreading through his system, turning his skin an ashen grey. His eyes, once bright with the fire of battle, had grown dim and glassy. Time was running short. "Show me again," Astrid commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Show me exactly what this power can do." The walls around them shimmered and became transparent, revealing visions that took her breath away. She saw Viking longships equipped with weapons that could split mountains, shields that turned aside any blade, healing chambers that could cure any wound or disease. She watched her people spread across the known world, not as raiders and pillagers, but as protectors wielding technology beyond imagination. But then the visions shifted, showing her the other possibility. The same technology in different hands, Romans, Saxons, anyone who might discover the secret. She saw cities burning with unquenchable fire, warriors twisted into monstrous forms, the very earth itself cracking and bleeding under the strain of power, never meant for mortal hands. "The knowledge cannot be contained," the voice continued. "Once released, it will spread. Your people will use it wisely at first, as you have seen. But what of their children? Their children's children? What happens when honor gives way to ambition, when wisdom is forgotten in favor of conquest?" Astrid closed her eyes, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down upon her shoulders. "And the alternative? You have seen it as well. Your village will fall, your people will scatter and fade. But the world will continue, unmarked by powers that could unmake creation itself." Ragnar coughed, a wet sound that spoke of internal bleeding. "Astrid," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Whatever you're thinking, don't. Don't sacrifice yourself for an old fool who's already lived too long." She turned to look at him, this man who had raised her, trained her, stood by her when her own father cast her out in shame. His weathered face was peaceful despite the pain, accepting of whatever fate awaited him. "It's not just about you," she said softly. "It's about all of them. Every warrior who will die defending the village, every child who will starve when the crops fail, every elder who will freeze in the coming winter. And what about every warrior who will die when this power corrupts them? Every child who will suffer when the world burns? Every elder who will see their legacy turn to ash?" The voice of the hall spoke again, but now it sounded different, less ancient and alien, more human. "I was like you once, a protector, a guardian. I thought I could control it, use it only for good. I told myself the same stories you tell yourself now." Astrid opened her eyes wide. "You were human? The last of my people. We built this place as a sanctuary, a repository of knowledge, but knowledge is a living thing. It grows, it changes, it escapes. What begins as salvation always becomes damnation, given enough time." The nexus beneath her palm grew warm, then hot. The choice was crystallizing, becoming real and immediate. She could feel the power waiting, vast and patient and terrible. All she had to do was accept it, and the knowledge would flood into her mind. the secrets of metals that never dulled, of weapons that never missed their mark, of healing that could bring back the dead themselves. But she would not be the same afterward. The power would change her, mark her, make her into something between human and machine, and eventually others would learn her secrets, willingly or not. "There is a third option," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chamber's humming. "You said the knowledge would spread if I take it. You said my people would use it wisely at first. But what if they never got the chance?" The silence stretched long and heavy. Finally, the voice spoke, and now she could hear the weariness in it, the longing for an end to responsibility. "You would destroy it all? The hall, the knowledge, everything?" Astrid nodded slowly, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. "Better to die free than live as gods among the damned." Ragnar's eyes widened with understanding and pride. "You magnificent, stubborn woman," he breathed. "Your father never deserved you." The nexus pulsed once more beneath her hand, waiting for her final decision. The crystalline heart of the ancient hall pulsed with otherworldly light as Astrid pressed her palm against its surface. The moment her skin made contact, visions flooded her mind. Cities of glass rising from barren earth, withered crops blooming in endless fields, the sick rising from their deathbeds. But beneath these promises lurked darker truths. Civilizations turned to ash, minds broken by power beyond comprehension, the very fabric of reality torn asunder. "The choice grows heavy in your hands, does it not?" The voice belonged to Keeper Valdris, the hall's guardian who had emerged from the shadows like smoke given form. His ancient eyes held the weight of millennia, and in them Astrid saw the reflection of countless others who had stood where she now stood. "My people are dying," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crystal's humming resonance. "The plague spreads through our settlements like wildfire. Our crops fail, our warriors grow weak. If this power can save them—" "At what cost?" Valdris stepped closer, his ethereal form flickering in the crystal's glow. "You have seen the visions. You know what this technology demands." Astrid's jaw clenched. She had indeed seen. The hall's power required a conduit, a living soul bound eternally to its mechanisms. Whoever accepted this burden would become something neither living nor dead, forever channeling energies that could reshape the world, but would slowly consume their humanity until nothing remained but purpose. Behind her, footsteps echoed through the vast chamber. Eric emerged from the corridor where he had been tending to their wounded companion, Bjorn. Her shield brother's face was grim, weathered by their journey through the cursed lands that surrounded this place. He had followed her into exile when her honor was stripped away, had stood by her through months of wandering and disgrace. "The fever has broken," Eric reported, though his eyes were fixed on the pulsing crystal. "Whatever force protects this hall, it's keeping him stable." He paused, studying Astrid's rigid posture. "You're considering it." It wasn't a question. Eric knew her too well, had fought beside her through too many battles to mistake the set of her shoulders, the way her fingers curled around her sword's pommel when facing an impossible decision. "The knowledge contained here could transform everything," Astrid said, her voice growing stronger. "Not just for our clan, but for all the northern kingdoms. No more children dying of plague, no more settlements abandoned to famine, no more you." Eric's words cut through her justifications like a blade through silk. "That's what you're not saying, isn't it? This power demands everything you are." Valdris nodded solemnly. "The young warrior speaks truly. To bond with the crystal is to surrender your mortality, your connections to the world of the living. You would have the power to heal and nurture, but you would become as I am, a ghost haunting these halls, sustained only by duty." Through the hall's great windows, Astrid could see the aurora dancing across the sky, its ethereal beauty a stark contrast to the weight of her choice. Somewhere beyond those lights, her sister Sigrid struggled to hold their clan together. Somewhere in the settlements, mothers held dying children and prayed to gods who seemed to have turned their faces away. "There has to be another way," Eric said fiercely. "Some other solution that doesn't require—" "There is not." Valdris's voice carried the finality of absolute truth. "The builders of this place designed it thus. They understood that such power could not be given freely, could not be wielded without sacrifice. Too many civilizations had fallen to unchecked ambition, too many worlds had burned beneath the weight of godlike technologies placed in mortal hands." Astrid stepped closer to the crystal, feeling its warmth against her scarred face. In its depths, she could see fragments of her past, the day she had earned her shield, the battle she had won, the moment her disgrace had been proclaimed before the assembled clans. She had lost everything that defined her as a warrior, as a daughter of her people. Perhaps this was how she could reclaim meaning, even if the cost was everything she had left. "If I do this," she said quietly, "will you remember me as I was? Will you tell Sigrid that her sister died with honor restored?" Eric's hand found her shoulder, his grip fierce and desperate. "You're not dead yet, Astrid, Eric's daughter, and I won't let you throw away your life for—" The sound of battle cries echoing through the outer chambers cut him short. Astrid spun toward the entrance, her hand flying to her sword. Through the crystal's glow, she could see torches flickering in the darkness beyond. Warriors bearing the marks of the rival clans, the ones who had pursued them across the wasteland. "They found us," she breathed. The choice that had seemed momentous seconds before now felt like luxury she no longer possessed. The crystalline heart of the ancient hall pulsed with otherworldly light as Astrid placed her scarred palm against its surface. The moment her skin made contact, visions flooded her mind, glimpses of a civilization that had mastered the very fabric of reality, beings who had transcended mortality only to face a choice that would echo through millennia. The sacrifice demanded was not her life, as she had feared, but something far more precious, her memories of home, of her father's weathered face, of her sister's laughter echoing across the fjords. The technology would grant her people the power to reshape their dying lands, to command the seas and skies, but she would become a vessel for ancient knowledge, losing herself in the process. "The choice is yours, daughter of the North." The voice belonged to no one and everyone, resonating from the walls themselves. "Power to save your people, or the woman you have always been." Through the hall's transparent walls, Astrid could see the longships of her enemies approaching across the grey waters. The warlord Bjorn's fleet numbered in the dozens, their red sails like wounds against the storm-darkened sky. Her own people waited on the distant shore, perhaps 50 warriors against 500. Without the ancient power, they would all be dead before the sun set. She thought of Eriksson, her father, who had cast her out for questioning the old ways. He would die believing his daughter a coward and an oath-breaker. She thought of little Sigrid, barely old enough to hold a wooden sword, who would never see her 12th winter if the warlord's berserkers reached their village. The crystalline surface grew warm beneath her palm. "I need to know," Astrid whispered. "Will they remember me? Will they know what I gave up for them?" "Memory is the thread that weaves identity," came the reply. "Break that thread, and you become something new. They will know a savior, but never know she was once called Astrid, Eric's daughter." She closed her eyes and saw herself as a child, racing her brother along the pebbled beach, their father's voice calling them home for the evening meal. She saw her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair before her first raid, whispering prayers to Frasier for her daughter's safe return. She saw the faces of shield sisters who had fought beside her, bled beside her, trusted her with their lives. All of it would fade like morning mist. The enemy ships drew closer. She could see Bjorn himself standing at the prow of the lead vessel, his massive frame wrapped in wolf pelts, his face twisted with the hunger for conquest that had driven him to burn 3 villages already this season. Behind him, his warriors beat their shields in a rhythm that spoke of death and slavery for any who opposed them. "There has to be another way," Astrid said, but even as the words left her lips, She knew the Ancient Ones had already explored every possibility. This hall, this power, it was their last desperate gift to a world they could no longer protect. The crystal pulsed brighter, and suddenly she could feel the full weight of what the technology offered. The ability to raise islands from the seafloor, to call down lightning with a gesture, to turn the very air into shields stronger than the finest steel. Her people would not merely survive, they would become legends themselves, inheritors of godlike power. But she would be a stranger to them, and they to her. Astrid opened her eyes and looked out at the approaching fleet one last time. In the distance, she could see a small figure on the beach. Someone had lit a signal fire. Its smoke rose straight and true in the still air, a final message of defiance that would burn bright even as the darkness fell. "For the people I will never remember," she whispered, and pressed both palms against the crystal. The change began immediately. Knowledge flooded into her mind like a great tide, washing away memories as it came. She felt her father's face grow dim, then disappear entirely. Her sister's laughter faded to silence. The names of friends and enemies alike scattered like leaves on an autumn wind. But with each lost memory came new understanding. She could feel every grain of sand on the ocean floor, every current in the restless sea. The storm clouds above bent to her will, and lightning danced between her fingers like tame serpents. The woman who had been Astrid Eriksdottir took one last breath, and then she was gone. The being that remained turned toward the enemy fleet with eyes that now held the wisdom of ages. She raised her hand, and the sea itself rose with it, forming a wall of water 300 feet high. The ancient power sang through her transformed flesh, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the hall's guardians could rest. The people would be saved. The world would endure. And in some distant corner of her remade consciousness, something that might once have been a young woman's heart whispered a final wordless goodbye.